Hi, I'm Kathy from Stitch It Together. I am talking about an alternative to Pattern Eclipse today. If you've ever used Pattern Eclipse, and I love Pattern Eclipse, it has a wonderful feature. It is a wonderful feature where you can create a pantograph or a block pattern, and you can then use Pattern Eclipse, this function in QCT 6 Pro, to go around Pro with gold, to go around a shape so you can get the automation to sew around or inside of something. And I love that feature, but there are some drawbacks to it. One is you can get a lot of jump stitches, and if you choose not to have the jump stitches to have an outline to something, you can have an awful lot of back stitching. And most of the time, that's probably fine. I use pattern clips a lot, and that it does happen. And I think in the beginning I was more worried about it than I needed to be. But there are times when you don't want all of that back stitching, or you don't want an outline, or you don't want all of those jump stitches. And I did figure out a way to kind of spoof it. You won't use pattern eclipse, but it'll work like pattern eclipse. Now, I don't think that you can do this in QCT 5 and below. I think you have to have 6 to do this. You have to be able to go into select and sew and make a tracing of something and then go into PatternCAD and be able to see that tracing. So I just need you to know that this will probably not work with QCT 5. You have to have 6. So let me show you what the problem is, and then I'll go to what the solution was. I'm going to share my screen. And now I am going to show you some panels and some blocks. Mm. This is the project that I am working on right now, and it is a panel. It is 43 wide and 33 and 3/4 high. So it is not a huge project. It's not a whole quilt, but it is big as compared to a block. So what I had wanted to do was use pattern eclipse in the background, but the same technique is when if I were to use the marking tool to draw out these shapes, I could also eclipse something in. And I can also, for the background, eclipse something out. But I would have to worry about all the jump stitches, and I would have to worry about whether I had a border on it or not. And normally that would be okay. This is not going to be my quilt, and it is for a someone who wants to enter it into a contest. And I was worried. So I've come up with another method. But just because this is a big area, and I'm going to say that it is going to be laborious the way that I wanted. It's going to be very time consuming to do this the way that I wanted to do it with the types of pattern. That doesn't mean that you can't pick something simpler. Here's another example. This is just a blocks. So maybe it's a 12-inch block. So maybe you want to have something that goes inside the cow's face, or maybe you want to have a background. Maybe you want to do both. This method would work either way you wanted to do that. So let me show you how it works. The first thing you're going to need to know is you're going to need to build a pantograph in the size of your of whatever your shape you're going to um, trace. For me, it was the panel. So I needed to create a pantograph that was 43 wide by 33 and 3/4 high. But if you had a block, you would want to make your pantograph the same size as your project, the largest part of your project. If you were doing, say, the cow's face, you wouldn't need to do the whole block. You would need to know if I had to put that in a square or a rectangle, how big would it be? So I'm going to use Power Panto to do this because I love Power Panto, but you're going to see that there is inherently a problem. So let me tell you what the overall process is. The overall process is you create a pantograph with whatever pantograph that you want to use. Then you take that picture, that designed pantograph, and you bring it into PatternCAD. You're going to take a picture of your quilt. So you need a picture like I already have to use as a background of your project or your block. And then you have over the top of that your pantograph, So that overlays the top of that. Then you're going to draw your pantograph around your shape on a different layer. So you will have three layers inside of PatternCAD. You will have the background of whatever you're working on. You'll have the pantograph that you're going to essentially copy. And then you have the layer over that that you're going to draw on top of it. So those are your three layers. The first step is to have the picture of whatever it is you're going to work on. The second step is you need to create the pantograph. So for me, I would create a pantograph. Oops, it says select a pattern. And this is just for demonstration purposes, whichever one that you want to use. Let's just say we want to use this one. And I would need to make it the exact dimensions that I want to work with. So I would change my total width to 43, and I would change my height to 33 and 3/4. I would say okay. And I'm not in PowerPanto. Let's change that to PowerPanto and do the same thing. And there we go. Now, this is where I would want to play with it, and I would want to get it to wherever I want it to be. But now I would need to save this. The problem with PowerPanto is that when I try to save this, it's going to save as a POW file. And unfortunately, you cannot bring in a POW file into PatternCAD. So that can be a problem. But guess what? There's a solution, and this is the solution. Instead of placing, even if you had a block, place it as a single pattern, even if it's bigger than your space. Place it as a single pattern. And this is why you're not going to stitch it out. Place as a single pattern. And if your project is bigger like mine, it's going to say your pattern is going to be resized to fit the safe area. That's fine. If you have a block pattern, it's just going to do this anyway. So this is the right proportions. So, and I'm not going to stitch it out. All I really need to get to is this button right here. This allows me to save it. But now look, it's going to save as a GPF, and that I can open up into PatternCAD. So that's how you want to save it. So step two, you have to save, was part of step two, create your pantograph and then save it as a GPF. So I have already done that. Let's close this out. So now you have a couple of options. If you are working with a block, you could go into select and sew. Let's do that really quick. And it doesn't matter which pattern you pick. You're not going to use the pattern. You would use your plugins and you would go to marking tool and you would draw around your shape. I'm just creating a square so you can see what I'm talking about. So when you're done with your shape, you're going to immediately close out and then open into PatternCAD. And there's this little box right here called Safe Area. And you would click that box and look, there's your tracing right there. So then if you had created your pantograph, you could pull in your pantograph from select pattern, and wherever your pantograph was, you could pull your pantograph into just your shape that way. But oftentimes you are working with something that's bigger. And for me, I needed to create, it was going to be bigger than my zone. And so what I then did is I had to create the map of my project. So what I did is I go to background and I would load my image. And here's my image right here. I open that up and there it is. And then I would want to put the pantograph that I saved onto it. So now it's select, so that image is its own layer. I can expand the image. I can make it bigger and smaller by using the magnify. You can see right here. I can make this bigger and smaller, but I can't really do anything except for I can draw patterns and stuff on it, which is what I'm going to do. But I want to have a template underneath. If you wanted to create just your own pattern, you didn't need a template like I do to create the pantograph. You could draw right on this. You could draw right on top of this. And if you were good at that kind of thing, that would be fine. Me, I'm not good at that. So what I would do is I'm going to take the pantograph that I actually drew for this. Oops. I'm going to go to patterns It's in here. I've already got mine. This is the one that I actually used, and I'm going to open it up. One of the things that you would want to note when you were when you're creating your pantograph is how many rows does it have? That might be important because remember, you don't want to do any kind of rows. If you're doing a block, you don't need to worry about that. But if you have something that's bigger than one zone, you would. Because if you're following a pantograph, you do not want to make a single row bigger than your zone space. So when I made my pantograph, I noted that I had 3 rows and that they were 11 1/4 each. So anyway, so you would want to make this fit your pantograph or your block, whatever one it is. So I'm going to unselect all, and then I'm going to select all. I'm going to undo those nodes so I can actually see my pattern, and then I'm going to size it. I'm going to lock my ratio and maybe a bigger step. Now my colors may look different to you because in the options right here, I've changed my colors. So I may need to move this just a little teeny weeny bit. You would want to make sure that it fits exactly where it is that you want this overall pantograph to be. So move my step. Let's zoom in a little bit. And I want to fill that space. I want to see where are my edges. There we go. There we go. All right. So that needs to be sized just a little bit more. There we go. So I probably do want it for the drawing purposes, to be a little bit past where I want it to be so that I make sure I get the edges in. So, but what you're going to be doing now is you're going to draw over the top of this going around your shape. So in order to do that, you don't want to draw on top. If I try to draw right now, I'm doing is adding to this pantograph, and I don't want to do this. I want to use this as a template and draw over the top of it to create my own pattern. So how I do that is I need to work with the layers that are in PatternCAD. So right now, the pattern that I created that I pulled in is the active layer, and I don't want it to be active now because I want a new layer that I can draw fresh on while being able to see this one. So how I do that is I go to this layers and I'm going to swap layers. So what that means is what I'm doing is there's a layer underneath of this one that I can't see that has nothing on it. And then I want to send the layer, and that layer I could write on if I made it active, and that's what I want to do. But I need to send this one to the bottom where I can't do anything with it. So that's swapping layers. So this is now going to change color. And so here it is. And now I can draw on top of this one. And so I'm not going to show you in this video because it would be it would just take so long. A big project like this, something that is a very complicated pattern like this, it did take me several hours to do this. And how I did it is I did it in 3 different rows because I know where my rows are. Let me show you. This is one row here to here. So what I did is I drew. Um, I'll just show a little bit of drawing. I turn off, you're going to go to draw, and I would turn off the nodes. And I just used all of these. I used mostly line, spline, and arc, and most of it actually was arcs. But I would just copy this pattern. Turn the nodes back on. You just copy your pattern. And I have said that there isn't backstitching. Well, there will be backstitching. It wouldn't be any more backstitching than if it was just this particular pattern. Now, this is a complicated background pattern. I can see anyone who would want to do just straight lines and go around this or something much simpler. You don't have to have such a complicated pattern, but this is what Judy wanted. And so this was what I had to work with. And I love this pattern. It looks beautiful. So you don't have to have something complicated though. But so what I did is I drew and I just follow these lines and see where it goes up out of the top of that. I just made a small modification so it didn't go outside of the lines. And I just kept going and going and I went around, using this as a template. And again, it's just a template and it's a suggestion. I, in fact, didn't follow it 100% because I needed it to go, I wanted it to be in one line in 3 rows. And I wanted it to go around the sewing machine. And so I took artistic license to make this pattern, mostly this pattern, and go around the sewing machine. So I did that, and then I saved 1 row. Then then I drew the next row. And for the next row, I couldn't have it in just one continuous line. And I couldn't because the sewing machine and some of these shapes are in the way. So no matter what I did, unless I wanted to go through my shape, I was going to have some jump stitches. Now I saved each individual row. That's what I needed to do. And so I did that. I'm going to now show you what the whole thing looked like. So I'm going to take everything out. I'm going to swap my layer so it's active so I can delete it. So I'm going to delete it. And I'll show you what mine did look like. So let me select a pattern. This is with all of them. You can see I saved each individual row, and then this is with all of them combined. So now we'll select all, and it will magnify a little bit, and we will size it. I'm going to turn off my notes so I can see. Now, I purposely, let me just show you a few things, made sure that there were a couple points in every single row that actually touched the outside edges of where I wanted to be. And this was so that I would know, I would have some guide marks when I'm going to place this pattern. I could be sure it was really going to be within that set bound. So when you're doing this, you want to make sure that you have at least 1 or 2 points in each row that actually touch whatever it needs to border to, so that when you're placing this pattern, you won't run into problems with that. There we go. You can see that this fits very nicely around what I'm doing. So Judy, I did not want it to go in the sewing machine. I didn't want it to go into these shapes right here, but Judy has embroidered these flowers by hand, and they're really beautiful, and she doesn't want to have any embroidery over those. So I designed this pattern to do all those things, to not go into those areas. This one is going to stitch out in one continuous line. My second row will have 2 jump stitches, and the third row is one continuous line. So now it did take me a long time to do this, but I'm going to tell you, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be once you get going. And if you were doing a block, it would probably not take very long at all. So it's going to depend on the how complicated your pattern is and how big your pattern is. That's the time that will determine how much time it's going to take. So how would I place this? Okay, so let me go into that really quick. There would probably be a lot of different ways that you could place this, but what I found the easiest was to use PatternCAD, to use Select and Sew and PatternCAD. So let me show you how I did that. When I went to place this, I had my everything on the frame, and again, when you first open, for this method, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to be placing row 1, but it doesn't really matter what you open into Select and Sew, because you're really not placing it. All you're really doing is using Select and Sew to get to this feature right here. You want to be able to use your marking tool. So with it on the frame, let's remove the ones I had before. I'm going to move this out of the way. I drew around my sewing machine. So there's no way I'm going to be able to draw that well. So I'm just going to use this as, oops, remove all, and say add. And let's just say this represents the sewing machine, and we know this is not the sewing machine. But so you're going to draw. And remember that I know that this is supposed to be 11 1/4 inches. So I measured and I did about 13 inches just to be sure, but it really should only be about 11 1/4. So I measured that sewing machine and I really only needed, I didn't have to do the whole thing. So I marked the areas, and I'm going to include that video when I actually did it. But I marked the areas just that I needed. And then you go directly into PatternCAD. You're going to go save area. And then my marking of the sewing machine would be there. Let me go back because there's one important feature that I didn't draw that you're going to need to draw to get this to work. So notice that I can go back out of, do you wish to, no, I don't want to, I want to save. I'm going out of PatternCAD and I'm going to go back into Select and Sew, and my marking is still going to be there. So if you've made a mistake, and if you did like I did right here and you forgot to add this very important feature to your marking, you can go back. So I need to go to my marking tool. Let's just move this out of the way. The one thing that I need to have is, in addition to the sewing machine, I need to mark the edges of my quilt. So I'm going to add that. And I don't care that the sewing, that I've added this line. I know what this line represents, because the line, this tracing is not going to get sewn. So you need to actually add where your quilt is. There you go. Add. So I needed to add that. Now we'll go back down into PatternCAD. This is already marked, and you see now the additional markings are there because I need to have the sides where the boundary of the panel in order to place this. So now I would go to row 1 that I have saved. That's row 1. And I would open it up. I'm going to select all. I'm going to size it so that it fits. And I did a terrible job, but hopefully you understand what I'm trying to say. And I would grow this until it fits the left and the right and the top border. And then remember that I have the actual tracing of my sewing machine in there, or my shape, whatever your shape is. And I can see if it goes in there or not, if it fits, if something is still now tracing. Because remember the what I used to create this pattern wasn't the actual sewing machine panel that was on the frame. It was, I drew it from a picture. So by the time I get it onto my frame, there may be some small differences. But because I did not flatten my pattern, I can make changes to any areas, because now you can see your nodes. So if there was an area that was now crossing over, unselect all here, that was going into the sewing machine or into one of those shapes, you could make some minor changes by, let's just select 1 or 2 points here, zooming in. And like if I needed to move this point, I can. And just FYI, you can move several at one time too. And you don't have to do it just with dragging. You can also use your arrows. See, just like that, you can move some things out of the way. You can even delete them. You might end up with some jump stitches then. But so you have a lot of maneuverability. So I have 2 practice panels of this, and then the real thing. So I know that there are going to be minor changes each time I put it on the frame. And I now have, without a flattened pattern just means it has ultimately more nodes than this. A flattened pattern is very hard to edit. So with this, I can make some minor changes too. And so then how you would place the second row. So I'm not done. Let me just show you then what happens. So let's say I'm all ready to go. I'm happy with the placement. I'm going to go to quilt. It's going to tell you that you need to save it. And save it as whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. Just do not save it as something that a name you already have, or it may overwrite and you don't want it to overwrite. So you're going to say, okay, and you can name it whatever you want. I could just name it 1 if I wanted to. Enter. It won't go forward until you name it. So I'm going to save, and it's immediately going to open back up into Select and Sew. So now here I'm ready to go. And so I'm going to say, and notice I only have pattern. If I wanted for some reason the markings to stitch out, I could click on markings, but in my case, I don't want to. but I'm going to say quilt, and it's going to give me a message. It's going to say the pattern has not been placed. Do you wish to proceed? Your pattern is placed, so you do want to proceed. So say yes. And then you would just stitch this out as normal. Now, even though your tracing is in there, unless you selected the box for the tracing or for the marking, it is not going to sew that. So you don't need to worry about that. And as you can see, this is going to sew in one continuous stitch. And so that's in fact what I did. So you would just sew that out. I'm doing this so I can show you how you place the second row. Okay, there we're done. So now what I need to do is I need to move my fabric. So I would roll my fabric and so that my second row is clearly in the middle here. And so this pattern is not going to be terribly hard to place, but I would still want some markings to be sure that my placement is dead on. So this is what we'll do. So we're going to go to Toolbox. I'm going to go to my marking tool. I'm going to remove all. So I'm starting all over, removing all that marking. And again, it does not really matter what I have inside of in Select and Sew right now, because you pick what is really going to sew when you go into PatternCAD. So you're really using Select and Sew to make your marking, and then you're placing it using PatternCAD. And then you're coming back into Select and Sew to actually stitch it out. So now what I would do is I want to absolutely make sure that I have my the outside edge of my quilt, the left and the right side. That's how, oops, I did the same thing again. That's how I know how big to make the pattern. That's how I know how to size it, is by having this in there. And again, this is not going to stitch out. So if I wanted to just like, this is not the edge of my quilt, it's the middle of it, but I can make my marking go straight across. It's not going to sew that. This is just for me to help me place it. So I can put as many markings, and so long as I know what the markings are, then it doesn't matter. So I kind of had this section right in here. So, oops, let me add this. So I kind of had a section over here. Mine was kind of in three sections. And so this is just going to kind of represent the three sections. Again, this is not going to sew. There we go. All right. So then I would go into Select and Sew. We're back here and I need to erase this one, but there's my new marking right there. And now I'm going to select Pattern and I would select row 2. Up, and I forgot to add something important. So that was on purpose. So let's go back because it's very easy to forget this part. So let's just say I did my markings, but what I didn't do was add some spots to where this would fit together. So let me go back into PatternCAD. I'm in Select and Sew, sorry. Back into Select and Sew. Again, it does not matter what I pick. I just want to get back in there. And there's my marking. But what I needed is I needed to add into my markings. I just go to Toolbox, Marking Tool. I needed to add some areas where the pattern is going to fit in. So remember, this is row 1 up here, and then this is where row 2 is going. So what I needed to add, and again, I don't care if it goes across, this is not going to stitch out. I needed to add some areas in here where just some of the stitching lines where the bottom of row 1, so that I would be sure I'm getting the right placement for row 2. And again, these don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to do every single one of them. You just want enough to be able to place the next pattern. That's really all you need, is enough to do that. So that can represent that. Okay, so now we'll go back out and we'll go back into PatternCAD. All those markings are going to be there. So there they are. So let's get row 2. All right. So again, I'm just going to size it, and I'm going to be using the left and the right sides of my quilt, and then the this line right here to make sure that it's lining up okay. So I would select all, size, lock the ratio, have a bigger step, turn off my nodes so I can see what I'm doing. Let's move it a little bit. There we go. All right. So even though it's not, I would want to grow this to fit to the sides. There we go. Maybe a step smaller. And again, you just work this until, and it really, this pattern, it really was not hard to get it to fit in where it's supposed to fit in. And so then you look at your pattern, the tracing of your pattern. And for me, this section right here is in between the sewing machine. And when I actually did mine, there were a couple of points on here that needed to be moved just a little bit. So what I did was I zoomed in, unselect all, and I had to move a point or two. I think these are the ones that I had to move. I just had to move them a little bit. I just had to move them just a teeny weeny bit so they didn't go into the shape. And then there might have been a couple more over here that I needed to move. But then you just quilt. Again, you save it as something else. And so I will delete this one. And that's the one that I named last time, just one. So another way, if you needed to not have a million different patterns in here that looked the same, which could be if you're placing this more than once, you can delete the previous one and you'll see that name was already in there. So once you deleted it, you can keep that name and it will save it. So here we are again, and I would just quilt this out, and then I would go to the third row doing exactly the same thing. With the third row, for me, I had the bottom edge of the quilt as well, so more help to place it. I did not have any problems when I did this. It stitched out beautifully. I have done this with blocks many times. This is not something that I would do for every time. I think Pattern Eclipse, the function itself, that feature is a wonderful feature. And I use that feature often, but sometimes you just don't want all that back stitching. And for occasions like this is a method that really works for me. So I hope that this will help you. I'm going to include in the YouTube, there are videos of me actually doing this on the frame. I hope that this is a better explanation of the process for you, and happy quilting. I'm Kathy from Stitch It Together.